Hi everyone, my name is Charlotte Hook and I'm our head of global programming. This event is really special to us. So this panel discussion is of course about digital health, which is a growing interest in our community. In fact, it's now one of the top 10 represented industries at Factor Berlin. And for our female and non-binary founders program, we had 17% of our applications come in the digital health industry. So we knew it was really important for us to source some really exciting speakers to come and deliver their best insights into surviving and thriving in this industry. So we put together a panel of some of our best connections to discuss this topic. With no further ado, I'll get off the stage and invite everyone to join me here. Thank you so much and enjoy the event.
Come, guys, you're the stars of the show. Can't do it without you. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for making it out tonight. We are, of course, going to be talking about digital health. Digital health is a notoriously hard industry to launch a company in. Not only do you have to jump over several regulatory and legal hurdles, but gaining visibility and credibility in a crowded market can be difficult. We saw how health tech boomed as a result of the pandemic. There was greater investment into biotech and drug discovery, and also a digital health explosion. But funding into health tech this year has taken a bit of a nosedive, dropping from 18.4 billion in 2021 to 9.8 billion this year. So with these challenges in mind, we are going to discuss strategies today for how founders can succeed in this booming yet very competitive market. So usually I would introduce the panel, but I thought we would do something a bit different and allow them to introduce themselves quickly, briefly. So Samir, you're to my left. Tell us how and when you began working in the digital health industry, and share one way in which the industry has changed since you started.
Cool. Hey, everyone. I'm Samir. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Doctorly. My background, very briefly, been working with tech startups for about 14 years, originally from London. I've been in Berlin for about 6 years. Entschuldigung, mein Deutsch ist nicht gut. Healthcare. So, I mean, so far I've worked with startups that did dating, gaming, insurtech, fintech, and now health tech. We founded the business about 5 years ago. And I would say the difference, there's a few differences. Number one, people who you want to hire, it's been more and more people looking for health tech from a purpose perspective. I'd say VCs are getting a little bit better at understanding it, which is pretty helpful. And I would say that's about it. It's pretty hard. Yeah.
Thank you.
Clearly one sentence. I'm similar to Samir. My name is Farina, sorry. The only thing I've ever done is build companies, and that's 14 years now. Like during all my steps, like the previous step actually was in healthcare. I built a Selfie, an online therapy app for mental health disorders. And we started that 2015. So I guess when you say, you asked the question about the industry, it's like, what happened in the last couple of years? There is an industry now. I guess that's my comment there.
Thank you. My name is Pia Martin. I'm 32 years old. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Canova AG. We are the first publicly listed cannabis company. And for now, we're in the medical cannabis space. Not sure if everyone heard, but legalization is coming up. So we're going to build also a legalized consumer brand for cannabis here in Germany. Yeah, I mean, medical cannabis has been legal since 2017. So the industry is quite new. So not sure what changed, but I see a lot of potential in the medical space, but also in the legalized space.
Hi. Hi, yeah, my name is Eckhard. Great to be here, thank you. I am an investor in digital health via the fund Heal Capital, based in Berlin, 100 million euros. And I have been in the industry since 2017. building companies out of a venture builder called Heartbeat Labs. And what has changed in my view is, Farina being the exception to the rule, the quality of the average founding team has gotten a lot better. I'd say that's a change.
Great, thanks very much, guys. You all kept it pretty concise. That's what we like. Farina, I want to start with you. So I wanted to kind of start right at the beginning, the early challenges of building a company. Obviously, you now work a lot with startups, helping them develop their business models. What would you say are the common mistakes that digital health startups tend to make, particularly in the early stages? And perhaps to add to that, how can they be avoided?
Wow, that's a question in the beginning. I could talk about this for probably an hour, but yeah, keeping it short and precise. I guess one of the challenges you have in healthcare, first off, is deciding whether you're acting as a medical brand or as a lifestyle brand, acting in a medical market or a lifestyle market, right? And I guess I see a lot of founders mixing that, especially in the early stages. So if you're building a medical brand, what I mean by that is you're targeting sick people, right? Like patients. You're talking about users, you're talking about patients, you're talking about medical regulation, you're talking about working within an ecosystem. Because if you're building a medical brand, there is an ecosystem in actually almost in all countries regulating healthcare. And I guess this is why I was saying earlier, there's an industry now for this, because just a couple of years ago, getting into the system as a startup was really a mission, right? In terms of like getting pilot projects on the streets and getting the first health insurance contracts and stuff like that. And you can really see that in Germany, but also actually globally, the markets, the healthcare market is opening up. You can see the NHS like doing piloting setups with startups, obviously still regulated and obviously still with conditions, but it is opening up. And I guess you're going to ask about DIGA in a second as well. So there's some stuff has happened, spoiler. So this is a common mistake, I guess, underestimating medical brands and also dreaming of mass market, which some founders think is more of a lifestyle B2C focus, but building a medical product in a self-pay market, for example, and then mixing lifestyle and medical brand, I would say is extremely challenging. But there's other experts, I think, who can talk about this as well. And the second mistake for me, one of the challenges in the early days is, I guess, especially not with the ideation stage, but like go to market and getting the first PF on the ground and yeah, MVP piloting projects. Like what I've seen is, especially if you're deciding for a medical brand and you're going into selective contracts, for example, with health insurances, you actually need to have done your homework, right? In terms of studies, research, clinical evidence, in terms of a functioning product and not just an MVP, because you're treating patients, people. And also, from what I've seen, like health insurances, for example, look at funding situation because they don't want to start a pilot project with a project that in 3 months is off the market. So it's a little bit of chicken and egg. And I guess go to market in healthcare. For me, and I've not done dating, but I've done fintech and I've done online marketplaces before. And I've done influencer marketing before. The go to market in healthcare, from what I've seen in Self-P, but also in the companies I've seen in the last 2 years actually that I'm working with founders, is one of the trickiest to kind of get a grip of. Yeah.
Thanks very much for that. Eckhard, obviously you meet with startups regularly, you've got portfolio companies. What would you say are the kind of early mistakes that startups make, and how do you think these can be avoided?
I think it's a very helpful question, and I was, while listening to Farina, thinking what's maybe a helpful answer. And I think maybe my framework to look at it could be, I think whenever you start a company, there are a lot of known unknowns and then unknown unknowns. And my feeling is in healthcare, it's a lot more unknown unknowns than I also was in fintech beforehand, in other industries. And why? I think it's a lot more complex market and it has a lot more weird incentives, right? So you see a problem, you build a solution, you have a go-to market and it works, right? because then apparently someone else is paying but not using it, or there's a doctor who's prescribing it, but he doesn't really maybe wants to do it, or he's not incentivized to do it. So I think for me, it's really, how do you mitigate that risk, right? It's about, I guess, the best teams we see really take the time to deep dive how all the participants in their market are working, incentivized, talk to maybe experienced people in this market, and then I think you can pull it off. And I think it's the greatest industry I've ever been in. So I really am positive about it, but it's hard in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Pia, I want to come to you next, because obviously working in the cannabis industry, heavily regulated, I'm sure the legal framework is also challenging. What have been the biggest challenges in an industry which arguably is still pretty taboo, right? Even though it's being legalized, in Germany at least, it's still quite taboo.
Yes, as Canovum, we, to make that clear, we focused on the really heavily regulated market, so the medical market. We don't have any CBD lifestyle brands, for example. So we focused on one thing, building a medical brand first, you know? Obviously, as a strategic intermediate step for legalization, but it was always clear to us we have to focus on the medical part to be successful. And getting all these regulations, licensing, for example, was really, really, really hard. But we managed to go through the process in a little over a year, which was very good. But it's difficult to be in such a highly regulated ecosystem. On the other hand, the rules are pretty clear. You know, you just have to play by the rules. There's a rule book. You need to fulfill all the requirements to get the licensing, go through inspection, you know, with the authorities and local authorities. We have a GDP license, we have a GMP license, so we're also a manufacturer. We can offer our own products and release them to the market as a pharmaceutical company. And we hold a narcotics license as well to distribute narcotics here in Germany. So we're heavily licensed and regulated, which was obviously hard in the beginning. But once you have the quality management system in place and everything works, it's easier.
So would you advise kind of founders here that have to obviously go through this process just to be incredibly detail-oriented, take it step by step? Like how do you manage this?
I mean, it's kind of similar to what you said. I mean, you have to understand all the different stakeholders, the market, the regulation. We had to understand, okay, especially for cannabis here in Germany, it is a specific brand is prescribed, which is different to other countries like Canada or Israel, for example. So you need to understand the local differences, you know, really, and the regulation behind it. And the stakeholders, adapt your strategy to it. And I think that's very important. And that's why I think we are good position for the legalization as well, because we've done all the heavy licensing. We have a quality management in place. Everything that comes for the legalized market, it won't be as tough, I guess, because it won't be the licensing we have now for the pharmaceutical space. So the requirements will be different.
Sure, you've done the groundwork already.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Samir, coming to you next. What would you say have been the biggest challenges in building Doctorly, which is practice software for doctors? Another very heavily regulated market.
Cool, yeah. I mean, just I suppose to put that into context, it took us 4 years. 4 years from starting to build the product, to regulating the product, to launching the product. Now, that could be because we're terrible, just to be clear. Could be. But I have it on good knowledge that other people are trying to build it too, and it's taking them many years as well. So maybe just to clarify, what is practice software? When you go to a doctor or house arts, gynecologist, dermatologist, any kind of practicing doctor, they have that computer that you just don't want to look at, right? Because if you look at it, you'll you'll just be like, I don't feel comfortable in this scenario, because they're using a software that was launched in 1987. And I'm not exaggerating. That's the #1 software in Germany. And they use it for everything. So it's for diagnosing you, creating your health records, for prescribing medication to you, for the billing process, for both state and private. They use it for the waiting room, the calendar. They use it for every form, sick note, prescriptions, referrals. It's done on a software that is mandatory and hasn't really been disrupted since the 80s. And I, this dude who hasn't even learned German, decided, let's build a new one. Let's build a new one, yeah? Because it's a cage that's literally preventing health tech from flourishing. Because how do you connect a cool digital device into that? There's no API. It's not in the cloud. The doctor has to draw with the servers and wires coming out of it. It's a localized thing. It's a piece of crap. And so, sorry, what was the question? It's been a long day. What was it?
What are the biggest challenges?
Oh, God, yes.
But only name 1 or 2.
All right, cool. I don't mind. So the regulatory process is pretty hard. So I've done digitized banking and digitized insurance before, fully licensed. Because BaFin have had the processes, they know how to work with startups, for example, right? When we went to go do this, they gave us like access to an FTP server, and there was about 17,000 pages of documentation, and much of it contradicted what was written before. So there was no, like, if something new had happened, they didn't get rid of the old stuff. So you have to read it all, then you have to start building, and then you regulate everything. So a form, like a sick note, has a regulatory process. And then a referral form has a regulatory process. And you get the idea, right? It's so that was super hard. But the cool thing is when you go to doctors and you show it to them, they're like, oh my God, this is awesome. And that's actually the whole point, right? Because we all think like patients, because we are. So we want to build things that could improve our experiences. But we don't realize that our experiences can't improve until the doctors does, because they're the ones who actually have to do the work.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of, so obviously this is very relevant to the German market. Like, we are all patients here. We know that there's a lot that can be done here in this area. Where else in Europe is this software really needed? Like, which countries? Everywhere.
Like, so I'm from London, and the doctor still has a fax machine, a landline telephone, and still gives me pieces of paper. There are weird, awesome countries that you don't have this problem in, but it's not the norm, right? So if you go to like a Sweden, maybe, or like a Israel, or like anywhere where they've just said, let's just do it properly and centralize it, right? But a UK, a France, a Germany, a USA, they all have the same problem, because just all you have to do is speak to doctors. I don't know if you know doctors. Just say, hey, what's the worst thing about your job? And they always say, I spend all my time doing admin. And that's because the tool they're using admin on is from the 80s, right? And then they're like, I don't get paid enough. And it's just a frustration around how hard they have to work to get paid what they get, even though it's more than most of us, right? It's fine. And then they say, I don't know, I don't like my patients, right? So this tends to be it.
Cool, fair enough. So I want to talk a little bit now about kind of building early stage teams as digital health founder. Is there like a typical rule of thumb about this? Or, you know, are there people that you need to recruit at the early stage? For example, like, do you need a lawyer up front to help you with these regulatory challenges?
I'm a lawyer by myself. I'm a lawyer myself, so I maybe can answer this. You don't need one.
Great.
Expensive.
You're out of a job.
Too expensive.
Well, and maybe not right for the job, right? Let's be honest.
No,
like,
not full time.
Depending
on what you do.
No, just generally. So we discuss best founding teams for a VC investor ongoingly. And so I think it's incredibly hard to answer, and there's probably not one right answer. What I would say, though, is that in order, also coming back to the challenges we just heard, you have to figure out how the market works. Right? There's a lot more market diligence you have to do than maybe in other industries. And in order to do that, you either have to be that person yourself, right? Or you have to have someone on board. And if it's a medical problem, you might need a doctor. You might need a medical experienced person. Other than that, I fully believe, I think if you want to build a tech company, you need someone who understands product or tech, at least to a certain degree. But other than that, I think for me, it's just about the craziness like Samir is showing, right? In like pursuing that incredible, I think, great dream, right? I think it's cool, but it's tough. But therefore, like for me, that's for me the only, I guess, requirement I see.
Farina, what was the case for you when building Self-P?
So one of the funniest, or not funniest, actually one of the things that I'd never done before is we founded the company, and I think we raised some money, right? Like I think 200,000 euros was our first funding round. And when we got that money, and I think even a month before that, we'd already planned our first study, because we decided really quickly that like we're gonna be the medical brand, not so much the lifestyle brand. Even though we didn't have a business model for 3 years, we still kind of. And now comes my second point. What do you need? I think you need endurance. Like it is a marathon. At least it was for us in digital healthcare. And I every player I see, and I mean, maybe there's like the founders back then were not endurant enough. I'm not sure, but like the endurance you need to have, and the struggle I was mentioning earlier in terms of establishing a business model and like this chicken and egg situation. If you decide for venture capital, you need to kind of get traction somehow, but it's difficult because you need proof for the business model, because that's what health insurances need. Like, so it's all building blocks. And coming back to endurance, I think you need to be a hustler. And I think, yeah, I can see you in this one. And I think with Self-P, we're just like hustling amongst the three of us. Like, this is why I always enjoyed not being a single founder. And I'm actually, when I see single founders, like especially in digital healthcare, I'm always like, wow, like I kind of look up to you to some extent, because with the three of us, we kind of build on each other. And there were a lot of points where I remember maybe one story in the end on this question. We decided not to, for 14 months, we tried to get contracts with health insurances after we started the company, 14, 16 months. And not a single health insurance wanted to talk to us because we're nobody at that point. And when we gave up on the health insurance business development / sales through a pitch competition called Healthy Hub, we got our first health insurance contract. And that was kind of the domino stone that kind of got us to get also the other contracts, because then we had a legal kind of framework. But up to that point, like, it was pretty much literally just hustling every day.
Can I just make one point? I want to share one thought on, I think, single founder versus founding teams. Because I'm not like deep in the numbers there, but I recently read, I think, that overall unicorn founders were a higher degree of, a higher percentage of single founders, single CEO, co-founders that then recruited a team. And the reason I think a lot of VC and investors actually look for founding teams is driven by Y Combinator and Entrepreneur First, maybe the last couple of years, who often try to pair people. So just want to make the statement that I think it's definitely not one is better than the other, in my view. Maybe even the single founder is better. I think it has a lot of pros if you have a good team you can work with. But I think anybody in the room who's building a company, I think you don't necessarily have to have a founding team. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, I think just because I think it's actually such an important question, especially if there are people in the room who are thinking about starting or in that period. I think what both of these people just said was really spot on, and you put it together, right? But I would say conviction as well as your endurance, right? Because you're going to get told no so often, right? You're going to get told no. You're going to be questioned. You're going to be told that it doesn't make sense. It's too hard to do that. It's too hard to do this. And I promise you that there's someone in a room somewhere right now going, God damn it, we got to deliver these groceries 2 minutes faster. Yeah, like even that, you got to have conviction. But I think in healthcare, you've got to have conviction to hear, because especially if you're raising funding, often what you're doing hasn't really been done before, right? And so if I'm an investor, I'm probably going to be like, I'm looking for evidence. I'm looking to mitigate my risk. This is a financial transaction. And I don't know if what you've done before has been done before. Therefore, I don't know if it can be done. Right. And that's okay. That's fair. That's their job. So your conviction level for this industry needs to be ridiculous. Just ridiculous. And that goes with endurance, and that goes with excellent people around you who also share your conviction and endurance. Like, it's, for this industry, it's non-optional.
That leads in really nicely to kind of like the next question that I wanted to ask, which is all about kind of building credibility, right? And what are the typical ways in which founders can show investors, for instance, their product's viability? You know, I know that some startups perhaps go the clinical trials route, or what alternatives are there? What are the typical routes?
Okay, I go to and take it. Well, I mean, the cannabis space in general, I think we're quite early on. You know, everything's still at the beginning, and I'm quite sure we're going to see more clinical trials in the future. But since cannabis is not a finished medical product here in Germany, it's a bit different to usual medicines. You know, it's not like a pill you stir around in the laboratory, in the lab, and then in the end you press it together and then you have a medicine. It's a plant, so it's a bit different. But we do retrospective studies with patients, and we gained a lot of evidence and data from that. So you don't need to do clinical trials all the time, because, I mean, we as a startup, we're not equipped to do the funding behind that, It costs $100 million or euros, whatever, to fund such clinical trials. And in the end, it's for a finished product and for one indication. And medical cannabis, for example, has a broad spectrum of indications, which makes it so unique. And also adds value in the medical community, I think. So there are lots of different ways to create evidence and data for in favor of the medicine. So it doesn't have to be a clinical trial.
I didn't realize that it's so expensive actually to do clinical trials. I mean, what was the route that you took with Selfie? Was there any trials that you had to take?
For us, by the way, it was definitely mandatory to have clinical evidence, and actually not just clinical evidence, but a certain type of clinical evidence. Because as soon as you start working with health insurance in certain contracts, like there's no workaround pretty much. Especially if you talk with the public health insurances, it's quite regulated. And the route you take is always RCT study. So if you drop that word, the people think you know what you're talking about. Which, by the way, I would say, not being a pro in that, but from what I've seen, is not a study design that actually fits digital helpers or digital applications, because it's a kind of like an observation style, but it doesn't really go with, for example, launching new features, which is a problem because then you have to do new study. But this is a different story. Anyway, studies, I would say, in the early days, I mean, there are still studies and studies, right? Like in terms of the amount of people you get into those studies and the clinical partners you have in order to get those studies done with. And you can apply for grants and all these things. Anyways, clinical studies in terms of costs, everything. Our first study cost us, I think, only 10K, which was like through a contact somewhere at a uni. Like we kind of made that, but it was also because we got some grant money in there. But generally, I would say like a good study, 50, 100K, and it runs not just over 3 months. And this is now the next issue. They usually run, I would say, roughly around 12 months, sometimes even longer. You can show results also in between, but like ultimately, right, like the study evaluation only comes after 14, 16, 18 months. And that obviously makes it tricky also because you don't really get contracts before the studies are finalized.
It's quite a long-term game then, yeah.
And now the view of the investor.
Yeah, of course.
Maybe also to make the clear, early stage, seed, Series A stage, usually 2 to 3 million. That's where and how we invest. I'd say medical evidence is don't know, priority point 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12, whatever on my list usually. I think what are we looking for, right? What I think it's outstanding data points. And so also, how does it work internally in VC? We talk to, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 new companies each day. We pitch them internally. And the first question I always ask everybody in the team is like, so what's outstanding? Like if you don't have anything that's outstanding, oftentimes, right, it doesn't really make that much sense to further talk about that deal, because we look at, I don't know, 2,000 a year. There needs to be something outstanding if we want to invest, because we make 6 investments a year. And I think like on the data points, there's qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative is sitting here, just exceptional founder. Like we have to put money into that person. That I think is a crazy interesting data point early on, even though you don't have evidence, right? So I think often you back teams, even at seed stage still, because there's not a lot. Other than that, I guess, of course, quantitative data points are always beautiful. And it can be medical evidence, it can be user love. I always love if there's like a B2B or B2C or a doctor, anybody who's like, you have to pay me money if you take it away from me, right? It's not I pay for it, but like, really, I want to keep this, whatever product you have. And I guess that's a little bit how we look at it. Always what's really is outstanding. And then, I mean, the more quantitative it gets, the easier for us, right? They have 6x growth year over year. It's crazy, right? I think that's easy, but often you're earlier than that, but then look for something else.
But in terms of doing clinical trials or whatever it is that you have to do, what stage company should actually be looking into this? Like at what point do you need to actually demonstrate these data points, whether qualitative or quantitative?
Just again, from my experience, I think it really depends. Unfortunately, the lawyer answer. Okay. I think if you want to go into the reimbursement, right, you often do have to have clinical evidence, which requires a study, and there are certain different types of study that are more and less expensive. And then I think you're often, if that's the route, like us investors, let's say in digital health, we have a lot of business model innovation where it's not really about that much new, let's say, clinical evidence, or you have real medical innovation. And I think in that part, I guess you need it more early, and maybe you have, I don't know, a clinical partner, a hospital where there's like a team working on it for a while, and then you get a cheap early indication of an observational study with like 10 members, and that's good. Right, so I think it really depends. If you're more on the digital health, like business model innovation side, maybe it's not even so much about it. It's more about like, hey, I have 1,000 people who really love the product. So therefore, I think it's really hard to say. But if you need it for the viability of your business model, being reimbursement at some point, you need to figure a way out where you maybe don't have an expensive study, but some kind of, I don't know, patient data points. I guess, Farina, you have, and also, I guess, in the pharmaco space, you've done that as well.
So you talked a bit about what investors need to see, but on the customer side, I guess with health tech, a lot of it is about building trust and credibility from the customer side, right? So how can you do that? How can you gain credibility and trust from your customers?
So I feel like there's we all have prejudices and ideas and concepts of who we're talking to, and I think for doctors, doesn't matter which country I've lived in, they're considered kind of old, conservative, and don't like change, and they'll complain about things, but they'll goddamn well keep it there. And I think that's super duper unfair. So I feel like whether you're doing fintech, dating, whatever, understanding your customer is number one, right? So I remember at the beginning, we didn't know what we wanted to build. We were just like, so we just talked to a lot of doctors and listened to them. And what we realized was there's so many really cool health tech products on the market, but the doctor still has a landline telephone and a fax machine. And we were just wondering why they were rejecting all of this stuff, right? And then the doctor's like, well, everybody comes here and saying, your patients are going to love this. Your patients are going to love this. What about me? It sounded really ridiculous. But like, I realized that everybody struggles to sell to doctors because they're not selling what the doctor wants. They're selling what they think patients need. And for us, it was, I think we called our company Doctorly. It was just like an homage to what we're here to do, which is to help the doctor to help the patients, right? So doctors really appreciated that. And by diving into what they do on a day-to-day basis, how they do an anamnesis, a diagnosis, a befund, what the form is, what the MFR is doing, what this machine does, how billing works on a quarterly basis in Germany, how they have to deal with reimbursements, how the KBV works with them, right? Like all this stuff, they were just like, you get me. You actually get me. So then when you tell them you're going to deliver 50x better admin time, or you're going to make them a little bit more money with billing optimizations, or you're going to be there for them, it starts to really resonate really well. I mean, we won an award from the KBV in I think week 8 of the business existing for trying. They were like, you're going to build a practice? And we were like, yeah. They were like, here's an award. That literally happened. There's not an exaggeration. There's a picture. So it's just understanding the customer, I think, from our perspective, which is the doctor, and, you know, fulfilling that need. I find so many of my friends in this industry go to doctors and say, why can't I sell to doctors? And I'm like, what are you selling them? It's like, well, I've got a booking tool. I'm like, that's cool. That helps the doctor, but it doesn't integrate into how they work. So you're asking the doctor to use 2 softwares, not 1. And then the doctor's being asked by a billing provider to use a 3rd software. And then somebody else has a telemedicine tool, which is a 4th software. And the doctor's just like, this is adding complexity to a life I can't stand. And I feel like, know your customer is the answer to your question. Then credibility comes with it.
Thanks very much. Farina, how is it for you in terms of getting customers to use Selfie, this digital therapy app, which I suppose in 2016 wasn't such a big market? No?
Yeah, so I can tell you, I mean, knowing your customer is 1, yeah. 2 is, I mean, I love brand building, right? So like, obviously in such an emotional space, that is so much fun. Like talking about like what you do, actually solving a problem. I think this is, by the way, a condition, and I guess it comes down to product market fit, a problem solution fit, sorry. But I would say 2 is just be present. For the first 2-3 years at Selfie, I remember like in the first year we pitched digital therapy and everybody looked at us going like, eh, what do you do? It's like, yeah, digital therapy for mental health disorders. Like, it needed explanation even, right? Like now we, at least like 3% of the Germans use telemedicine, but back then it was not a thing. So it was a lot of like educational work as well that needed to be done. So being present and educating. And I guess, like Samir was saying, addressing the doctor, I always thought a brand in the first instance should give and not take. So designing a brand and designing a solution that gives something to the recipient, whoever the recipient is, right? And I guess for us, it was, I don't want to say it was easy, but it's never easy to build a brand. But like for 2-3 years, we're present everywhere and talking eye level. And I guess that comes back to your previous question on whom do you need in your team or at least in your immediate surroundings is at a doctor's conference, if you're addressing doctors, or in our case, psychotherapists, having somebody in the team who's a psychologist or psychotherapist was obviously immensely important, because this is people talking eye level to each other with a similar educational background. If I was pitching at a doctor's conference, this is just a mismatch, right? And obviously they're not taking me serious for, I guess, reasons. So the second point of like being present, talking eye level, giving, and I guess coming back to the case of Selfie, we all agreed, Nora, Kati, and I, my co-founders, always agreed that like 50% of our mission back then, and it still is, was fighting the stigma for mental health. And so in our mind, also in our business plan, actually, we did allocate money to fighting the stigma. And I guess that kind of one thing there led to another. So we were always authentic and in a way also emotional ourselves about solving this problem, and said to ourselves as well that if in a year's time Selfie dies for whatever reason, because startups can die, right? Like, I mean, Eki can say more about the stats there, but like 90%, I don't know, 96. So we all said if we die in year 3, like we at least helped 5,000 people, and we fought for people being okay with not being okay. So I guess this, like, and you can see me now talking, so you see like this is something that really emotionally had kind of some sort of basis in us, I guess, foundation in us. Yeah.
I mean, you both already touched on this a little bit, but maybe Pia and Eckhard have something to add. When it comes to actually getting doctors, clinicians, pharmacists, whoever it is, to actually listen to you and actually use the technology or your product in any way, what can founders do for best chances of success? Like in these early conversations, what should they really be outlining?
Okay, I totally feel you. I could, sign a lot of the statements you just gave here. But for us, it was very important to understand the medical community. I myself, I study international business, so I'm not a physician. Yeah, I'm not a part of the medical community itself. But we wanted, for us, it was important. Every patient deserves the best therapy. That's for the medical part. For the legalized part, the vision has to get bigger, and we want to make people's lives better. So quality of life, also mental health is a big issue, I think, and plays into what you just said. But starting off, it was very important to us to build a medical brand in the community. So it was also important for us to have a medical advisory board. So we started off right at the beginning, actually, when we went through our licensing to onboard medical professionals, experts in the field to advise us, but also to give us credibility, to going to the question before. And I think it's very important, but I guess you could also say it depends, but for us, it was very important. And if I had to do it again, I would do it the same way.
I don't have that much to add. I think I would say learn from the best, and that's pharma. If you think about doctors, I think they have figured out the game, how to work with them to bring innovation to all of us, which sometimes maybe is not the right innovation. Well, we find that out later. But generally, I think they have figured out that, at least from a business perspective, that game. Other than that, I think I fully agree with everything I heard.
Cool. I want to talk a little bit about DIGA, which you hinted at earlier. So I'm sure everyone in this room knows that DIGA actually enables the cost of digital healthcare apps to be reimbursed by state insurance. But this Digital Healthcare Act, it made a lot of promises, right? But has it actually delivered?
Eki.
So I think it has delivered for, I think, where we're at in digitalization in Germany. If we look at what we have trying to build, we don't have an electronic health record in Germany. I don't know how many non-Germans are here that maybe have not gone to the doctors. But we just don't have that. It's non-existent, which I think is, even in NHS, I think they have that for quite a couple of years already. So we are literally still in some kind of stone or paper age in Germany. And so I think in that sense, it has delivered, that it has, I recently looked it up again, has 35 already reimbursed digital products, as I think still one of the first or then even largest markets in the world that is doing that. So I think that's great. And then I think a lot of things went wrong. So I think there's somehow still a big fight against that system for whatever reasons, which is unfortunate. I think I talked about pharma. I think again, maybe due to also lack of funding, a lot of the companies have not figured out yet is the distribution of those solutions, because I think like if someone has used Self-Appear and really liked it, it's, I think, great, but not enough people know about it, not enough doctors prescribe it. So there's just a lot that has not been figured out yet. I think what would be unfortunate is if we don't now push forward. I think we are currently also looking into that heavily, want to invest. We haven't invested in the DIGA yet, but want to invest in that market and really push it forward, because I think we have the chance to really create great exportable innovation in digital solutions from Germany, which is not that often. Otherwise, I think in the end, we're going to import again whatever worldwide solution comes to market. I think it's what we have to push through.
So I'm probably biased, and I'll tell you why. Because I was actually together with like a group of entrepreneurs back in, I think 4 years ago, so 2018, with our old health minister involved in designing the DIGA scheme. So if I bash it now, I'm kind of bashing that. But that would be okay. I think what Eki was saying, the idea is good. The idea is now copied, from other countries, right, and implemented. So that kind of tells that like we're doing something right here. But it's not a guarantee for a business model, and it never was designed that way. And this is, I think, also the I'm having a lot of discussions with actually other VCs on the topic of would you invest in Diga, and some say no, I'm not at all, because it's not scalable. Yeah, it's not scalable per se. Obviously, it's not scalable across countries because Diga right now only exists in Germany and is kind of being implemented, I think, in France. But Diga comes with what I said earlier, not a business model, meaning, yes, there is the responsibility of the government, I would say, to educate the doctors and like market into the, to the physicians. And at the same time, though, I think, and this whole branding exercise, it was my area, right? Like building up the sales and the medical brand, the branding. Customer acquisition would still always sit with the company, the startup, whatever it is, right? Like, and yes, I see responsibility in the government, and I'm not seeing a positive trend here. I would agree on that, with the political change that has happened, right? But there is responsibility for the startup to also acquire patients and create a pull momentum from the patients to the doctors, because that also works. And I do kind of agree with Eki on pharma has done it well in terms of marketing to physicians. At the same time, a startup cannot afford and will never afford a direct sales machinery like pharma has. So somewhat of a piggybacking mechanism could be implemented, right?
Is it worth it then? Is Diga worth it for startups to get onto, and can they scale without it?
I would say depending on the business model, because Diga is highly regulated in terms of what the product can and should and is allowed to do. For some businesses, it's a valid business model, it's a valid case, but get somebody in who understands negotiating with the regulatory bodies, because it is not like the pharma companies, like they have lawyers and people who have negotiated with the BfArM, right, with the institute there. Get people in who know the game and then play the game. But don't rely on the game to feed you. That would be my,
Very quotable line. Cool. So we've got a couple of minutes left. I want to talk about fundraising. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of doom and gloom in the market right now. And fundraising is harder than ever, it seems. So, Eckhard, should startups be seeking funding right now?
The good ones, yes. No, generally, of course, like if you need money and you don't have revenues yet, you need, of course, external funding. And I think it's still a good way to go out to VCs, but also other investors in the market. I mean, it's probably harder than last year. Like, let's be honest. I mean, interest rates go up, risk goes off, and VCs get weird, so to say. So we look for other KPIs sometimes. We want to invest later, want to see more de-risked solutions. And I guess I also feel there was a little bit of a 6 month probably period of nobody knew what's happening, let's say March to September. And I think, let's say what the numbers say in the end, but that Q4 could be picking up again. At least there are a lot of companies in the market. But funding has gotten a lot harder. But of course, you have to go out. And I think you should also still be building companies. I think it's a great time. Easy for me to say, of course. But I mean, if you go out, I think, just to maybe make the quick point on VC, like how do we look again at companies? We really want to fund the outlier company, and the outlier company is probably not building a single Diga. Right? That was one topic for us. The outlier company is a little bit crazy, is a little bit like Germany's not enough. It's like what you put in here is probably only a tenth of what we need in the end to build the $1 billion or even bigger company. A16Z just published the paper, I guess last week, about the biggest consumer company or whatever in the world will be a healthcare company. So I think there's tremendous potential to build in that space. The current environment is not easy, so watch your cash, but still go out if you need to.
Founders, if you were pitching right now to investors, what would you be including in your pitches? What advice could you give to founders that might be fundraising right now?
Okay. So, I mean, as a startup, obviously you have to fundraise. For us, I started Conovum in 2019, which was probably half a year before the pandemic hit. So in that time, it wasn't easy. But I agree with you. Probably it's not going to get easier now. As a publicly listed startup, we also have access through the capital markets to capital, obviously, and which presents another exit scenario for investors, over the stock exchange. In a recession, all of this is, you need to see this relatively, but no, I'm happy that I've done it, and I would do it again, go public, to be honest. It was the right decision. What can I advise founders? Keep at it. A lot of people will say no to you, but at some point someone will say yes. And if you have the conviction, and I'm very lucky, I have investors that do this with me from the beginning. It's always good to have strategic investors who see the big picture, not just, the immediate future and a recession, a pandemic or whatever, but believe in the cause and the purpose of the company. And then it gets a little bit easier.
What I would add to this would be, for a lot of VC funded startups who are going to go through that journey, access to capital is pretty much the CEO's number one reason to be. It's kind of sad, but it's true, right? Because the company's going to do really cool things, but if you're the CEO, you have to make sure the resources are there for them to do so. And so I'm in the blessed position that when I founded this business, I was surrounded by some really great people. For example, the chairman of my board and the first investor is a person called Julian Teicher. He's the founder of WeFox. Don't know if you know that. Very successful German startup, and his success becomes my access in some respects. Just as an example, he has made money for investors, so when he makes an introduction, it gets a little bit easier. Right? So surrounding yourselves with people who believe in you and your business before fundraising is a step that I would recommend taking. The other thing to realize is it's kind of all BS, honestly. It's a game. FOMO is a thing. It's ridiculous. Look at some of the funding rounds that happened. You know that it wasn't really proper due diligence that got there. It was a fear of not being involved. That's a thing. So knowing that you need some excitement around, and I say that because I recently had a fundraising period for myself where, like, if my fundraising was a ship and I had a sail and the wind was interest, the sail was very vertical. That's the best way I could put it. There was just a straight line, right? And you go to an investor and you say, hey, but things are good now. And then they know you've been fundraising for a while. So it's like, well, nobody else gave you money. Why are you coming to me? I'm not even the best investor in the room. You're coming to me because you haven't got any other options. And if you haven't got any other options, I'm afraid to give you money. Doesn't matter what your KPIs anymore. You stink of failure. That's a genuine real thing, and you have to just make peace with it, right? So energy, creating that interest, creating the momentum. Try not to be addicted to VCs. I struggle. Try. Things like that, honest to God. Yeah, it's access, introductions, get people to like you, get them to like your idea. Get momentum around it. It sounds really silly because you could be just like making an extra 20K in revenue, or you could be, but that sometimes won't be the reason you get the funding round. The funding round is because loads of people want to invest. I've had people literally put money in who didn't meet me because the round was pretty much done. They heard about it. They're like, please, just let me put some in. And I'm like, oh, all right then. All right, I'll take your money. Yeah. And it's like knowing that this is actually how it works. You could be the best founder in the world and you might not get funded, and you could be the worst founder in the world and you can get the most funding. Knowing that that is part of the game is essential for you to be successful in fundraising. I'm not saying I'm an expert. I really am not. But I've learned a couple of things through failure, which is the best way of learning. So I'll shut up now. Yeah.
Can I make one observation on that? And I think it's totally true. I think it is changing over the last 18 months. I think that's still true that FOMO is very important, but 2021, everybody threw money, especially at the deals that had the hottest brands, and you had party rounds, and everybody was following everybody. And now we see that due diligence gets more important again. Not just following other VC brands is important again. And I think a lot of people in 2023 will realize that a lot of the rounds that looked hot in 2021 will actually be bankrupt, and they have to think again for themselves. So I think there's a little bit of a counter trend, but probably 80 to 9% still true. So fully with you on that.
I would just make one remark, even though I never made this conscious decision, sorry, but maybe you can. Be conscious about which arena you're entering, right? Because VC is just one option. VC is good for some, but not good for others. And what Eki was saying earlier, obviously a VC, Eki as like the equivalent of a VC, they look at the unicorn potential. But if you decide you want to launch a company in healthcare, because we're talking about healthcare today, and you only want to do DIGA, you might just be building a small to medium enterprise. You might get a strategic investor in, and you might not even have the ambition to sell, but you have the ambition to just build a long-lasting company, right? And I guess this is sometimes like when I sit in those panels and when I read Gründerszene and all these like startup press. Not you, obviously.
Not sifted, never sifted.
I always think like, why is there such a dick show about like, oh, I've raised 50 mil, 100 mil, and I'm like, yeah, but first of all, I want to see your top line and your bottom line. But second off, this is just for some, but not for others. And I guess like there is actually some really cool other options of having access to capital. Look at those family offices, even like revenue-based financing. Like there's a lot of options. So I guess make that decision before you make the decision to enter the arena there.
Yeah.
That's an amazing point, and I just want to add to it because it's such a good point. Timing as well. So let's say you even do want to raise money from VCs because you've genuinely consciously thought, I messed that up super bad, right? So we raise money on an idea from a VC, and that's maybe the worst thing I've ever done in my life. Because they're professionals, and I had an idea. I did not know it was going to take 4 years to launch, for example, right? So if I had maybe bootstrapped it a little bit, take a little bit of angel money, and then worked out, wait a minute, this is actually way harder than I realized. I could have made a compelling case to raise more money up front to do the job properly, because I feel like a professional investor wants to invest in the hotel, not the lobby. And then you're going to, so I went with like, just.
I love these metaphors.
Yeah, like if you can show that you understand how to build a hotel, they'll give you the money for the hotel, right? But if you turn up and you're like, I got this great idea for like a bathroom and like some chairs, and then we're going to see what happens next, right? And I'll be honest, I wasn't that bad, but if I look at my first deck, it was awful. Like I think we said 1 year, and we're going to have a health app, and we're going to have digital book, and we're going to have this, and we're going to have that. And then because the VC money was in from day one, the professional clock starts ticking, which means you can go back 6 months later and be like, that was wrong, by the way, my friends. And they're just like, when's it going to launch? And you're like, gotta be honest, not sure. But I need a little bit more money.
Samir, I think you need to come back and do like a keynote on like alternative financing. That would be good.
No. The VC money is good. It's just, I'm just saying I messed up, and I'm just sharing that because like, don't do it. It makes it harder. It's like, don't make my mistake. Like understand what you're doing, then go to the VC. Because you can be a great founder, but you can still mess up. Like also all I'm saying is, honestly, I wish I took an extra 6 months before taking the VC money, because then I would have taken more, and then drip funding's a real thing. It's drip.
Cool. On that note, I'm going to let someone else ask the questions, not answer the questions. Does anyone from the audience have anything they want to ask the panel?
And I'll bring the microphone. Thank you.
Hi, maybe this is a question more directed towards Pia and Farina, but I'm curious to ask about what's normally the approach for startups when it comes to negotiating with peers and regulatory agencies, especially because normally, you need to pay a lot of money to do this, or maybe you want to like get other what's normally the approach when it comes to negotiating with payers and regulatory agencies, like whether it's to do the DIGA or something else?
Sure. I can only speak for the medical cannabis space. So it's highly regulated. So you need to get licensed, and this is done on a federal level by the bee farm, but also on the local level. So you need to understand the layers of regulation, who you need to answer to, and usually they have, if it's very regulated, like the pharmaceutical industry, they have a checklist. Basically, there are procedures. Everything is. There are procedures for everything. You just need to understand them. So what we started, I think one of my first hires when I started out with Canovum, it was me, my co-founder, but we got quite quick. We realized, okay, we need someone for the regulatory stuff, you know? So we quickly hired our head of quality management and regulatory affairs. So that was basically our first hire. And it helped a lot to get into all the regulatory things and understand the layers of the regulation in Germany with the bee farm, with the local authorities, also picking a local authority because I decided against Berlin because yes, well, I mean, it took 8 weeks to answer an email. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to do this here, you know. So I moved the company somewhere else, and making a decision there, you know, a strategic decision, and really looking into the regulatory bodies and understanding what you do. I think, and the stakeholders in it is very important.
I have a microphone, but I was just thinking about like what to add, right? And actually, I had a co-founder who was really great at putting together those like documents. Like, you need somebody, like it is what Pia was saying. Like for the DIGA, for example, the last application form we had was, I think, 42 pages, and 42 pages of not like filling out stuff, but like more of like tick lists of things you need to have in place. So, like one of the things like we did was obviously like have somebody in the team who kind of actually enjoys to some extent also, right? Like doing these things and kind of get something from it, because it is tiring and it is a German bureaucracy in the end. And there are people who enjoy like going through these things, and I guess I admire that. And you need a person like this. You need a medical lawyer. Like that was for us quite important, and somebody who understands like data architecture. Because not just a typical CTO who like builds or CPO, but like we quickly understood that it was important to have somebody in the tech team sitting somewhere. I mean, you can put him or her somewhere that actually puts this data architecture into action, right? Because that's something like in Germany at least, like you can do a lot of things. Just like, I mean, you can tick all the boxes and do all these things, and like then there's a section for product and data architecture and data security. And you can tick those boxes, but it could be that you're being checked on that, right? And these are the scandals that you then rate of like healthcare startups that kind of don't exist anymore, because then you're screwed, because then even a lawyer can't bail you out, because you need to put these things into place. So I would say, like, for example, if you're going for DIGA, talk to somebody who's done DIGA before, who can tell you some of the red flags, some of the like pitfalls and stuff like that, and then get somebody who's kind of good at like project managing this task, and have a techie. If you're doing a digital product, health product, have a techie who kind of puts it into action also for data architecture. Yeah.
Any more?
That answers your question. I can't see faces. It's really weird. I can just see hair.
Full stage lighting. Are there any more questions, anyone? Any questions?
So, I'm sorry. for cannabis and so yeah. So for cannabis, I come from Canada, and I'm like very interested to know your opinion on how the cannabis industry is going to thrive in Germany.
Well, I think it's safe to say we are before the hype cycle that happened in Canada. So Canada already, I'm not sure everyone is familiar with that space, but Canada has already legalized cannabis, not just for medical use, but also for adult use. And here in Germany, we have medical use so far, with the prospect of having a legalized market in 2024. So we are before all that. There are similarities, but also differences. And I was also part of the expert hearings this summer. So the German government, was consulted by international experts, also from Canada, countries that already legalized, to basically have a blueprint and learn from their mistakes. And I think Germany is in a perfect position to legalize cannabis now. Also, a lot of other EU countries are looking to legalize cannabis. So I think we have a stronger position than we would have had probably 10 years ago. And for the medical space, it's very important. But I think the prohibition laws or the drug politics in the EU the past decades didn't work. So we need to try something else, like Canada did, like many US states did. So I think it's now over 20 states that legalize cannabis in the US. And if you look at the recent developments, I believe Germany and Europe in general has a big future and has a potential to become the biggest market in the world, just population-wise, So I think if it's done right, it can be a big opportunity and lots of potential, not just for the medical space, but also for the legalized space. And it's a highly stigmatized topic, so it's time to change something, And I believe adult use market will also be a huge thing for the medical market, because we need to decrease, we need to destigmatize the topic and really acknowledge that this is a medicine and can improve people's quality of life. I hope it answers the question.
Please give a round of applause for our panelists and our moderator. Thank you all so much as well for joining us. It was a really fun event. It was really just great to see that everyone was super engaged. I saw some people taking notes, so it's good. Maybe you can ask some more questions once we go out in the Cinnabar. So we're going to go outside into the Cinnabar, which is where you came in before. You can have a drink, network with us, come say hi, and see you out there. Thank you.